As corporations, as hierarchical structures get full of people who are doing nothing but trying to climb the dominance hierarchy, you know, they're power motivated, they're very annoyed at anyone who's competent and creative, because the competent and creative people are using competence and creativity to climb the hierarchy, whereas they're just using political machinations and the desire for power. So they want nothing, they don't want to have those people around, because all they are is competitors. And they're not even that, they don't even actually care if, while they're climbing the ladder on the ship, the thing is sinking. You know, in fact, they might be facilitating its sinking and trying to pirate everything they possibly can while the thing falls apart. And that happens all the time. So, and it happens in all sorts of institutions. So, that's sort of the son-eating father representation in a political or corporate institution. You know, and it's sort of, what's interesting about that, I think, is that both the liberals and the conservatives see that, eh? Let's say the left-wingers and the right-wingers. The left-wingers see the tyrannical element of the Great Father in corporations, and the right-wingers see the tyrannical element of the Great Father in the government. So it's projection. You know, I mean, it seems to me like a radical oversimplification to assume that all the evil is embodied in the government or all the evil is embodied in corporations. It's like, you know, we should be a little more differentiated than that. So all corporations are not the same, obviously, and all governments are clearly not the same, and all governmental policies are clearly not the same. But people are lazy, so they don't want to do the differentiation, and so what happens is that the archetypal representations possess them initially, and they fail to differentiate them. You know, and they're pretty happy about that because their theory explains everything. You know, I talked to a guy a while back, and he's a pretty smart guy. And I was thinking about this issue of corruption. I was trying to think, I thought, how the hell did some countries get not corrupt? Because I cannot figure that out. I cannot understand how that can even be possible. And for me, that's a massive mystery. Like, I can imagine digging through that for like 30 years trying to sort it out. And he answered in 2 seconds. He said, well, it's government. I thought, you know, all that means is I don't want to think about that. And so here's my one-word, low-resolution answer that covers 50,000 snakes at once. It's not helpful. You know, all it does is convince him that he possesses knowledge, because he's using low representations to encompass huge swaths of the complex world. You know, it's so... Punish them,
yep.
The next time, and then offer to work with them.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be iterated, like aggregate to form trust?
Well, but that is exactly, so the reference there is, you know, people have tried to model optimal social interactions, you know, so should we cooperate or should we fight? So I think one of the differences between what I'm proposing and what Heidegger proposed is that, like, I would never say that there's a utopian solution to the problem of the Great Father. I would say you're stuck with the positive and the negative. You're stuck with it. Now, I think through diligent effort you can keep the positive on top of the negative, but you don't do that by sacrificing strength. You know, you don't get rid of tyranny by weakening society. All you do then is you increase the probability that when tyranny bursts forth, it's going to be far more brutal than it would otherwise be. You know, you increase the benevolent element of society by increasing its competence and power. So you make it more powerful, not less. Now that doesn't mean more oppressive.
Going back to this people who've been tyrannized into weakness, like that's sort of like that Solzhenitsyn quote about the beloved acts.
Mm-hmm.
They had to have the rightness or else insanity's not far off.
Right.
So people go out and do something terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do they like accept that it is a beloved or it is an act, not something that's for them and like
They don't. So that's a Solzhenitsyn problem. So one of the things Solzhenitsyn wrote about was he was in prison, in the prison camps in Russia for a long time. And one of the things that he used to amuse himself with in the darkest possible way with his compatriots was teasing communists once they got arrested. You know, and It was pretty brutal, because once you were thrown into the Gulag system, the probability that you were going to get out, especially if you were a political prisoner, was like you're in there for 20 years. You know, and you're lucky if you didn't get worked to death, and the thugs and the murderers and the thieves didn't beat you senseless constantly till there was nothing left of you. So it was no joke to be thrown in the Gulag if you were a political prisoner. And there were lots of people who were thrown in there purely arbitrarily, and that's actually because if you really want to punish someone, you punish them because they didn't commit any crime. That's a way better punishment than punishing them if they actually committed a crime. You know, because that's just justice. But random punishment, if you want to be brutal, that's the one to use. So the communists would get thrown in with the prisoners who'd been in there for a while, and they'd still be like rampant communists. They'd be writing letters to everyone and trying to extricate themselves from the situation, assuming that a mistake had been made. You know, and Solzhenitsyn and his compatriots would just tease the hell out of them, because they had nothing left to lose. Plus they thought, well, you're still part of the goddamn system that actually imprisoned and brutalized yourself and us. So part of Solzhenitsyn's moral problem was, what should I do with you? Like, should I feel sorry for you because you've fallen into this absolutely hellish category of that person betrayed by their own ideals and their own person? Or should I treat you like, well, serves you right because you're a blind tyrant and look at what you've produced? And Solzhenitsyn's answer was, you're a blind tyrant till you repent. Right? So as long as you still think you're right, there's no possibility of communication. So then what he observed was some people would collapse. They'd admit, and maybe it took a long time, that maybe there was something wrong with the system, and that the other people in there weren't all the guilty ones and them the only innocent ones. So some people would accept the facts, even at whatever brutal cost that would be. And what that would be was starting to decompose the entire value system they had that was predicated on axiomatic communist belief. But the other ones, and these are the ones that Solzhenitsyn also writes about, they just never changed. You know, released 20 years later, they'd say, well, that just proves the system was right all along and that I was in error. Because you know, you can always interpret the data. The data does not speak for itself. That's a big problem. So I thought his solution was brilliant. It's like, well, what do you do with someone who's still acting out what has destroyed them? Well, until they stop being part of that, you can't really forgive them or communicate with them. But as soon as they drop it, it's like, well, then you give them a hand. Which seems to me like a reasonable balance between justice and forgiveness. And that's a very hard balance to strike, right? It's a very hard balance to strike. So, okay. So then I kind of differentiated this into the tyrant is the king that eats his own son, roughly speaking. And that means that, like if you have a tyrannical father, say in your actual family, what that father is going to do is to react to everything that makes you independent, or that could make you an independent being, as if it's a challenge to his own authority and dominance. And so whenever you stand up, you know, and make your little thrust forward like you would if you were a 3-year-old, you know, you're going to get whacked hard for it. You're going to get punished for everything that would allow you to climb a dominance hierarchy and to become a challenger. And so that's sort of the paternal element of the Oedipal situation, you know. Mother who demands nothing, and father who punishes everything good. It's a perfect combination if you want to raise someone who's completely demolished and also, in high probability, resentful and dangerous. So, and you know, you have societies like that too. You know, you see this in corporations, especially when they start to deteriorate, is they start to punish the people inside the corporation for being hardworking and creative. And you know, the thing is in real trouble at that point. It's basically dead. It might take 10 years to fall over, but it's basically dead.